renaissance that goes beyond old political categories or other identitary niche. TU, autodidact workers with earbuds and professionals who see no future in existing institutions or movements are able to challenge their doxa and develop an understanding of the situation we are in.
If you subscribe at theoryunderground.com, you'll get access to a package of courses, including my Intro to Fault Line Theory, which includes Intro to Nick Land and Intro to Slavoj Žižek. These courses are being woven with the 3 courses that take place on a month-to-month basis, spread out throughout the year of 2025. Those courses are 12 core concepts and the fundamental problems with the situation today with social theorist David McCarricker, 12 essential political thinkers with political theorist Benjamin Studebaker, and the philosophy of nature with philosopher Nina Power.
The way these all get woven together at a deeper and more meta level is through the ongoing research seminars led by David McCarricker, Benjamin Studebaker, and Michael Downs, where they engage with one another's work by sharing developments from their own perspectives, theory, and research.
If you subscribe at higher levels and support our work, we'll support your development with bespoke teaching. Alone and unaided, we struggle to grasp our situation in its fullness and formulate a meaningful response. By working together and pooling our energies, we can do better. Join us at theoryunderground.com/subscribe.
There'll be 2 kinds of people in 10 years. Those who said, I knew all along Theory Underground was going to make this huge difference. Those are the people that are like Nance, who were on the sidelines at one point and then said, nah, I'm going to get in. I'm going to roll up my sleeves and I'm going to go hard. And then there's another kind of person, a person who waits in the wings, collects receipts, and who will say in 10 years, oh yeah, I was there. I saw that happen. And then they'll gossip monger. Listen, if you want to get involved, get involved. But if you're going to sit there in the bleachers, well, here's some popcorn. I hope you have fun.
Oh, hey, Dave. What are you up to?
Hello. I'm grading right now. So.
Grading? Well, what's that?
Oh, this? This is a G2 pen. It might be the best pen in the entire world because the price point is perfect for working class people like us. More importantly, cartridges are replaceable. The ink, it glides, but it doesn't smudge too bad. And most importantly, you can do that. And it's really fun.
That's pretty cool.
We at Theory Underground are not sponsored by Pilot, nor does Pilot endorse this commercial. Theory Underground is funded by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.
All right, we're live. What's up, everybody? How's it going, Benjamin?
I'm good. It's good to be doing another one of these.
Yeah, it's been crazy these last couple of months, huh?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we were just talking about all that on the back end, and basically, Benjamin's in a new place every day. that's my zoomed out, exaggerated, simplified summary. But we are as well. So we're coming to you live from the United States. I am in Billings, Montana, a place I've never been before. Benjamin's back home after his long trip in Europe, promoting his book. And we're very excited to be with you all here today. Let's kick this thing off. We don't have the theme music ready to hand, and so we'll just kick it off.
Yeah, that's temporary. All right. Hi, I'm Benjamin Studebaker.
And this is David McCarricker. You're listening to Why Left. So today on Why Left, we're going to be talking about what's going on in the world. And as per the usual, I've tried to keep my head in the sand. But some things get through, and I've heard some crazy things, and so I'm excited to get into that. I'm also excited to tell you all a little bit about the tour. The tour. I'm gonna make my little notes here. Tour, the Sarutu research that we're doing, the studio fundraiser campaign, and this amazing painting that is behind me on the wall. I made a Substack post about it today, so we'll get to all that in a little bit. But for now, let's just kind of dive in, folks. In the live chat, you're a part of this production. You're helping us keep the audience in mind while we go. Of course, a lot of the people listening to this, the overwhelming majority of the people listening to this, do not have the time, the energy, the patience to look at or be in a live chat. And those of you who do are a special breed. And there's two kinds of that special breed. The kind that are like the chatters in live chats all across the internet. They're like teenage-minded, annoying people. And then the Theory Underground brand of chat participant, which is like the coolest and best and wisest, oldest, most maturest of the whole internet. And so we're pleased to have you all here. And please let us know in the live chat what you think historians will say is significant from the last 2 months. Historians in 5, 10, 20 years, I guess they kind of matter, but also like in 100 years. Is there anything like really like, I don't know, people will refer back to this. And then that's my little springboard into putting it on you first, Benjamin. Yeah. What's going on with all these tariffs? What's going on with Trump? What's going on with Democrats? What's going on with the state of the political, the state of the social, the state of the civil, if there is such a thing?
Yeah, so a couple of things that have stood out to me over the last couple of weeks. One is that the period of negotiation with regard to those tariffs came to an end, and then there was a question about whether it would be renewed. And during this little interval, the tariffs were put back on again on Canada and Mexico. And this generated a lot of distress about, are they actually going to stick this time? But no, this became the basis for extending those tariffs again another month. So I think April 2nd is the new deadline. And presumably, if Donald Trump likes the way the conversation is going and feels progress is being made on the various issues that he cares about, then maybe there will be further extensions, or maybe the tariffs will never come into force. We don't really know. The thing that did happen, and that does appear to be sticking, is that the tariff rate on Chinese goods has gone up from 10% to 20%. So the first time that they talked about putting tariffs on Canada and Mexico, they also put tariffs up on China 10% across the board, on top of the specific sectoral tariffs that the Biden administration had gone along with Trump in imposing, and had even increased in certain areas to a certain degree. Now we again have no tariffs coming in on Canada and Mexico, but a boost to the tariff rate all the way to 20%. Now you could imagine if he had put tariffs of 20% on China at the very beginning of this process, that would have gotten a lot of attention. People really would have talked about that. But because he's fainted on Canada and Mexico at the same time, each of the times he's raised the tariff rate on China, the effect of the news cycle is to say he's not following through, he's not actually doing anything, he's just playing around. Meanwhile, the tariff rate on China has gone up enormously, and nobody cares. Nobody talks about it at all. And this is an enormous, enormous change. This is going to affect all of the plastic crap that you buy enormously. It's a crazy 20%. That's a huge tariff. Everything from China. Everything. Not just specific defense-related sectors. Everything. That's a very, very important change to go all the way to 20 in 2 months. in 2 months. We barely even knew what the 10% tariffs were like. It was too early even to say exactly what they meant. And now we're all the way up to 20. And China responded by saying that they're prepared to fight a trade war or whatever other kind of war the Americans might wish to fight. Wild stuff, but nobody's talking about that. Everyone's focused on Trudeau and Sheinbaum, and of course that's a game that's going on in the background. But since they're not actually imposing those tariffs and they're just playing around with it month to month, this is myopically drawing your attention, and then anything else that he's doing drops out of the picture. They're also playing very, very interesting games with the Europeans, and these games come out of that whole meeting with Zelenskyy that took place. And that meeting with Zelenskyy, it's not clear to me that they necessarily planned it such that Zelenskyy would say what Zelenskyy said. But certainly they needled Zelenskyy in such a way that if Zelenskyy did say something, they could potentially use it. And they have been holding these diplomatic meetings, these meetings that typically would occur in a more neutral environment, say in the White House lawn, in a conference room, somewhere else. They've been holding them in the Oval Office in this cramped environment that the president really controls and can shape. And then the leader of the other country is getting surrounded in the room by other people like Vance or Rubio that the president can call upon to gang up on them in the meeting. Or maybe not call upon them to do this, but they're free to potentially interject. So this kind of meeting is typically used so that the leaders can present a united front to the press. The leaders can say, we've discussed behind closed doors what we're going to do. We've come to this agreement, or we've made progress toward an agreement. Let's share the results of our discussion with you. Look, we're on the same page. We're getting along. Things are stable. Here they have used it for completely the opposite purpose. They've used it to create a sense of chaos and disorder and insecurity. And this is assumed to be stupid or a mistake by them. I mean, it could be, but look at the effect that it's having. The Europeans now are saying that they have to increase defense spending because they can't rely on the Americans to defend Ukraine. And the European left is now enthusiastic about this because it's viewing this defense spending as an anti-Trump measure. However, it remains the case that these European states are in NATO, in the alliance structure with the United States. So their militaries cannot be anti-American because they remain formally in a military alliance with the United States. What's more, it's long been the aim of the European centrist liberal technocrats and the U.S. administration to get a European army, to have a European army that can play a supplementary role in Europe. This is something that has been part of the aim of the pivot to Asia for a long time. The thing is, back during the 10s, it was very, very difficult to get the Europeans to boost defense spending because they were mired in the Euro crisis. They were doing austerity. They could barely afford to spend on their welfare programs, their public services. And there was enormous public opposition to increases in defense spending because this austerity was going on. And so all of the other parts of the European state were being trimmed. And if there had been an increase in defense spending in the early 10s, this would have put even more pressure on the fiscal environment for them, in the sense that there would have been potentially runs on their bonds, runs on their currencies, on the currency, on the euro, if they had behaved in this way without adequate backing. Now, there was some willingness on the part of the United States and the IMF to provide that backing to the euro, to use the dollar to prop the euro so that there could be more spending on defense. But the Germans were not willing to do it because the Germans believed that it would cause inflation. And they believed this even though the experts at the IMF and the American government were telling them that this would not be the case. The German government under Merkel refused to do this expenditure during the 10s. So it refused to support investment, it refused to support propping up the public services, and it refused to boost defense meaningfully, certainly in the first part of the decade. Now, during the Trump administration, there was a significant increase in European defense spending. And the average or median in terms of the percentage of GDP came up from maybe around 1.5 to around 2% of GDP, which is around where it is now, 2% or just over 2%. But if you want to do the pivot to Asia, if you want to really make it the case that a large part of European security is provided for by the European states, so that you're free to redeploy your military infrastructure to the Pacific. You want them to spend more than 2. You want to get them above the NATO target, up to maybe 3, or perhaps even 4. You want to goose them to get their spending up in line with the American number of 3.5. So by creating this unstable environment where people are not sure what's going on, this allows for the argument to be made that there's a need for the Europeans to stabilize the situation by boosting military spending. And so by acting like you don't have a competent, reliable American leader, you can generate an argument for this. And the same is also true with respect to business operating in China. If you don't know what the tariff environment is going to be, if there's uncertainty about the tariff environment, that uncertainty itself can be a reason not to operate in a country, even if the tariffs don't get slapped on. Now, in the case of China, they've gone up to 20%. But if you don't know if there are going to be tariffs, and you're deciding whether to build a factory in Mexico or Canada, you might not do that just because you don't know if there are going to be tariffs. And so a prominent example of this recently is Honda has decided to construct the new Civics in the state of Indiana at a factory in southeastern Indiana. Presumably, that will be where it will be because that's where their facility is currently located, instead of Mexico.
Okay.
This isn't because of a tariff. This is because of the talk about a tariff.
So just talking about it. I guess one of the things that really stuck with me from the course I used to be a TA for called Thinking About Climate Change, it was like an intro level college class, is that a lot of the people at the business department genuinely don't care what the policy is for how we address climate change, but what they do care about is the fact that they can't really bank on those policies or regulations staying the same for more than 4 years. Meaning that if you have like an Amazon warehouse and it wants to lower its emissions because of a regulation that's going to penalize not changing their their venting or however they're emitting, they look at the situation, they go, oh well, we've got a penalty coming if we don't do this, so we're going to have to spend $100 million to upgrade all of our different warehouses. And then they're going, oh, so that's $100 million. Paying the fines for not doing it would only cost us $10 million. And if we actually do it, the chances are the law will get repealed. The regulation will be walked back in a few years anyway, right? And so like a lot of the business professors who would come and give guest lectures, like for them, it's just like, yeah, we care about the planet, but what are we supposed to do? Sounds kind of like, kind of similar in this case, yeah?
Yeah, dynamism and credibility kind of contradict as principles. If you want a state that can make changes, then that state can also behave in a way that isn't totally predictable or totally reliable. And conversely, if you want a state that's very predictable and very reliable, then it won't change things very much. So if you want to diminish credibility for the purposes of getting people to act as if there's no credible business environment or credible security environment, changing your mind all of the time diminishes credibility for the environment. So what he's doing is creating an unstable business environment without necessarily imposing the full cost of the tariffs on Canada and Mexico. And then he is also, by imposing the tariffs on China, straightforwardly undermining the business environment there. And then, similarly with Europe, he's creating uncertainty about the security environment so as to get others to change their behavior.
Mm-hmm. So no one's talking about China. No one cares about China. And of course, China is a bigger threat than Russia. Right? Isn't that right? Like, wouldn't China be a bigger threat than Russia when they're out here saying they'll do whatever it takes? They're ready for whatever kind of war, Like, they're a much bigger country, much more advanced, are they not?
Well, so it depends on what you mean. If you're talking about standard of living on a per capita basis, like Human Development Index, it's better to live in Russia than in China in terms of human development. Russia remains a more developed country on a per capita or per person basis than China, still to this day.
Okay.
If you're talking about the capacity of a state to dominate world affairs through its economy or its military, China is certainly economically and militarily more powerful than Russia. Much more powerful. Indeed, one of the things that I think is kind of bizarre is that a lot of the people who claim that it's a mistake for us to fight the Russians will then nonetheless claim that the Russians are really powerful and that they can defeat NATO or defeat the United States in Ukraine. The reason that we don't need to fight the Russians is not that they are so strong that they're going to beat us. It's that they are too weak to pose a meaningful threat. It's that Russia is a big gas station that mostly sells oil and gas. The other industries that it has are not very competitive globally and don't withstand competition with industry either based in the West or based in the East particularly well. It's a country that has, a GDP that is very, very small relative to either the United States or China. They spend an enormous percentage of their relatively small GDP on military to try to stay competitive. But even then, they very much struggled to perform. And this is not just the case in the Ukraine war with, they're failing to take Kiev, which the apologists call a feinted attack. It's also the case when they went into Georgia, and the military reports about that, were all over the place. So they don't have a very effective military. It's kind of old-fashioned. It tends to rely very much on dumb shells, tank columns, vintage 20th century stuff. Nevertheless, they have a strong level of commitment in Ukraine. They're much more committed to Ukraine than the United States is. It matters much more to them than the United States. But the thing to bear in mind is when the Russians and the Americans, when the Europeans were offering a deal to the Ukrainians back in 2014, an economic deal which the Ukrainian government rejected, favoring instead a Russian deal, when that happened, and that's what immediately kicked off the revolution, which the United States was to some degree involved in trying to spark, but which also did have certain organic elements to it because it was in response to a specific decision taken by the Ukrainian state, which was to favor a Russian economic package over a European package when the European package was better economically. The reason that they preferred the Russian package is that the Russian package would have a security advantage of not producing a bad relationship with Russia, while the consequences of rejecting the European package strategically, militarily, are not very significant. So they were going to take an inferior Russian package because the inferior Russian package would at least keep the relationship with Russia calm. And the population became frustrated about this, in part with the encouragement of Western elements in the society. And that is what led to the original taking of Crimea in 2014, the move into Ukraine by Russia to take the peninsula. But in that situation, the Russians were giving the Ukrainians everything they could in that economic deal. And it was still an inferior economic package to a package that the Europeans could offer that was inferior to packages that the Europeans were potentially capable of offering. The Europeans have never offered Ukraine the same kind of terms that, say, Poland gets as a member of the European Union, as a full member, as a member of NATO, a full member. Poland has a really nice set of terms for its membership in the Western alliance system. Ukraine's never been offered that full set of terms. Nevertheless, what the Westerners have offered Ukraine has always been better than what the Russians have been able to offer because of how relatively weak and poor Russia is. And this is something that I think many people lose. And it's part of what makes the whole situation so tragic. The reason Russia has invaded Ukraine is not that Russia is strong. It's that Russia is weak and desperate and struggling to economically develop. It's isolated. It isn't integrated into the global trade system in a way that would allow it to grow rapidly or to produce a very happy society. And it's because the Russian state and the Russian society are suffering to an enormous degree, that they have become reactive to the degree that they have.
I mean, what about the whole, and this is, like I said, head in the sand, but I overheard that at some point there was a change in government, some people say a coup in Ukraine, backed by NATO, that then banned the speaking of Russian in regions of Ukraine that are historically Russian speaking. So you have all these people being told they can't speak Russian anymore. I mean, is that not like an act of war, regardless of strength or weakness? Russia, when the original deal with NATO was like an inch would not be moved towards them, right? Like NATO would stay back. And that's obviously not what's happening in Ukraine, if what I just said is true.
Right. Russia's not strong enough to be able to stop NATO expansion. And that's why NATO has expanded repeatedly. The Americans are not going to not expand NATO simply because of things that were said 30 years ago. If states want to join NATO and they want to join the European Union, and it seems to be in the interest of the West to do that, and the Russians are not able to impose costs so as to make it not in the interest of the Western states to expand, the Western states will tend to expand these structures. The situation in Ukraine is complicated because both the West and the Russians have been repeatedly involved in what's going on in Ukraine. They have both tried to shape the governments that they prefer as the organic governments that belong to the Ukrainian people and which the Ukrainian people agentically have chosen. And they have both tried to frame the governments belonging to the others as a consequence of astroturfing. The truth is that there is a very healthy mix of Ukrainians who want these two different outcomes and astroturfing. There is interventions by the Russians and by the West in Ukraine to try to produce the outcomes that they want, and they're constantly looking to delegitimate the activities of the other party. And this makes it very difficult to tell where any kind of Ukrainian agency begins or ends, and it raises major questions about what is actually going on within Ukrainian society and what relationship this activity has to the interventions of both the West and Russia. Because Ukrainian society is, in a sense, a kind of, it is not independent to the degree that either party portrays. Each party portrays the parts of it that are affected by it as the independent voice. Mm-hmm. So this produces a situation where Ukrainian governments are not neutral and are often taking the side of one set against another set. And therefore, whichever kind of government you have in Ukraine, the people with the opposite view within Ukraine feel to some degree threatened or menaced by that government. And there will be many, many statements about why they feel threatened or menaced. And these statements may be true in multiple directions. So that would be how I would try to frame it. Oftentimes people will play up one of the sides very much against the other because of a sympathy that goes one way or the other. But I would say, well, of course, the Russians are the weaker state in this power struggle over the fate of Ukraine. That doesn't mean that they don't also make interventions in Ukraine, which the Ukrainians experience as onerous. The Ukrainians are much weaker than both the Russians and the Western states. So they experience, and they're much more proximate to Russia geographically. So they experience Russia also as a state which intervenes in their society, makes demands upon them, and prevents them from, say, becoming Poland. In the same way, a different set of Ukrainians think that their country is being destroyed and wrecked because of a foolish attempt to become Poland, and that why not just be Belarus? Why not just have peace and have some kind of stable relationship with Russia? And then you've also got the third position that it could be a DMZ and potentially get investment from both sides, some investment from both sides.
A what? A
but
DMZ?
For that to happen, a DMZ is a demilitarized zone. So the thought would be make Ukraine a neutral state, a kind of buffer state that isn't fully integrated either into the EU or into the Eurasian Union, Russia's attempt to make an alternative to the EU. The issue with that is that the factions within Ukraine think that they can get their preferred outcomes. There are factions in Ukraine that think they can make Ukraine into Poland. There are factions that think they can make Ukraine or some part of Ukraine into Belarus. And so there is not really a ton of willingness on the part of all of the players to make it a DMZ. Nevertheless, that is the outcome that I think at this stage would be preferable to Russia and the United States, if that can be agreed in such a way that both Russia and the United States are not overly concerned about the military behavior of the other. So there's a question then about if it's going to be a DMZ and there aren't going to be weapons, does that mean that Ukraine is going to have some of its territory returned to it, some of the territory that Russia has taken? And if so, how much? If the Russians insist on keeping the territory that they're occupying, then that may make the Westerners unwilling to make Ukraine a DMZ, and it might cause them to put military bases in Ukraine. And that might be the way it goes. We might end up with a situation where there are military bases in Ukraine, but they're not NATO bases. They belong to a European army, which is its own separate and distinct thing and not technically NATO. So it wouldn't be NATO expansion, but there would be this European army that would be operating in Ukraine, and it would be protecting the mineral rights of the Western states in Ukraine. And that, I think, is kind of how they're looking to finesse it, so that they can put lots of weapons in Ukraine, but not have that be NATO expansion.
Mm. I think that more or less aligns with what I'm hearing sensible people say. And that it also sounds like it's a very neutral kind of like assessment in the sense that it really, you're taking the position of, well, this is what they say and that's what they say, and they both have reasons for saying it, but also, here's the options. And so I'm going to want to ask you, I kind of want to ask you what you think my dad versus my father-in-law, who were both guests on this show in the early days, as, kind of archetypical good Democrats and Republicans, but not as, politicians, just as, good old Americans, what they probably are hearing. And then I'd like to use that as a springboard to bring them on, hopefully in the next few weeks, and we'll encourage them to listen to this ahead of time if they can find the time, so that we can all have a conversation about it. Because I'm really interested in how Democrats and Republicans are thinking about foreign relations and trade wars and wars, and how it seems like Republicans are trying to brand themselves as the anti-war people, and Democrats really haven't cared about branding themselves that way for quite a while. But we'll be right back, everybody, right after this short little interpolation from Nance. He's going to speak to the audience. But before I roll him doing that, I want to remind you all that I did, at the beginning of this stream, ask you all to share your own little updates as far as things that are super important that have happened in the last couple of months. I took a quick look at the live chat, and I did not read all of your guys' back and forths because I know a lot of you are multitasking and having other conversations, which is great. But you got to @ me if you want me to read your contribution. So just use the little @ symbol at Theory Underground so that I see it. Otherwise, I won't see it. If we were trying to make money through our streaming stuff, then we would actually do the super chat thing, and then you just have to pay money for us to see you. But all you have to do right now is tag us, and we'll read it. Maybe on the air, maybe not. We'll see. We'll be right back. And sorry about the lag, everybody. It's a laptop processing issue. It has nothing to do with internet speed. The studio we are in here with Tyler is a fantastic internet source. It's just a piece of crap laptop. If anybody has a really fast one, give it to me now. We'll be right back right after this.
Ha ha ha. Yeah, that was funny. And/or that was a good point, Dave. I probably fully agree with you. Man, this is great. Aren't we having a great day? This is going really well. But hold on, man. Something just came up. I got something I got to go do. I'll be right back, man. Don't go anywhere. Just give me a minute. Hello, audience. I'm here to talk to you. How are you? I hope you're well. I'm glad you're here. I wanted to first and foremost recognize you and let you know that you do a great job in general as an audience. I'm convinced that the Theory Underground audience is the best audience on the internet. And thank you for that. You know, over the last several months, we've really worked together to build a finely tuned audience machine. You guys do a good job. You're deliberate. You're intentional. You stay on track. You follow the thread. You ask good questions, clarifying questions. You keep the bullshit to a minimum. It's good. You guys are great in the live chat and in the comment sections. Thank you. I wanted to let you know there's another way that you could be helpful as an audience member, and that's by remembering to hit the like, share, subscribe buttons. It's by leaving a cool comment. That's by maybe giving a review on the podcast app or whatever, and doing all the algorithm things. Because there was a point in time when you, audience member, were not a member of the audience here because you didn't know about Theory Underground. You were just out there doing your thing, living your best life probably. And then you were like, oh, what's going on over here? This looks interesting. And now you're here. And now you do a good job. But think about the next guy. There's a guy out there, or someone out there right now who really kind of, in a sense, really belongs in the audience at Theory Underground, because they're going to get an awful lot out of it, but they're also going to bring an awful lot to the ongoing conversations. And the only way they're going to know is if you, dear audience, continues to do the algorithm things, so the algorithm keeps recommending Theory Underground to new people. So do us a favor, do yourself a favor, and do the next guy a favor. Pay it forward, and that'll be awesome. That's all. That's all. You know, just wanted to pop in, say thanks. You're doing a great job. We appreciate it. Give yourselves a pat on the back. And with that, we'll return to our regularly scheduled broadcast. Peace out, guys. Actually, there's a good chance I'm on the video. So when this commercial break is over, I'll be there either way. Peace.
We're back. And everybody in the live chat who's been commenting on the microphone lag, yeah, you're right. It's a lag, and there's a lot of it. And it's not just the microphone. It's the whole CPU, GPU, you know, whatever, computer situation with this laptop. But as Benjamin just said, shouldn't matter for the podcast people. For the people who need to, like, watch my lips say the words. Sorry. Anyway. But Benjamin, so yeah, okay. I had this little sneak peek into the life of the American left over the last week. I needed a little solitude, and so I went to a friend's house for a couple days, and just tried to learn guitar and hang out in a chill zone, because I knew we were about to embark on a tour and constantly be in each other's presence, and I was like, I need a little solitude before I am in that much participation with others. And so I learned some chords, but I can't play for shit. Anyway, every morning they play the TV, and my friend's boyfriend, he sat down on the couch. He's an old friend too, actually, and he said, I have to admit I have a toxic trait. And I was like thinking, oh, here we go. I probably put the towel on the wrong peg or whatever. And he was like, yeah, every morning I watch CNN for 45 minutes. I was like, okay. And so the whole time I was there for 3 mornings, I got to see whatever CNN's on about. And basically, it's like, I mean, it reminded me of why I don't like the news, that's for sure. But it was like this constant sort of sensationalized, like, oh, the country is just crashing and everything's burning, and Trump's a fascist, and he is trying to destroy Ukraine and all of this stuff. And I saw the clip of Trump and Vance kind of punking Zelenskyy. And then that one guy who's just like off to the side, he's like, why aren't you wearing a suit? It's like, it's actually like, I mean, it's a highly memeable moment. I think it was a, very like a symbolic moment. Like they're definitely coming in and saying, this is what Biden should have done in the first place. Instead, we spent like $400 billion trying to bail out a country that's fighting a war that cannot be won unless we go fully in and actually take on Russia. Right? That's kind of just where I'm coming from. But if to even say that in the context of a house or a family's environment that watches CNN every day is awkward, because I think it makes me sound wildly out of touch and potentially reactionary to a Democrat. And because Jon Stewart was going off about how, well, he was going off about all of this stuff, and he was using a wrestling metaphor and calling this a heel switch or whatever. And one of the people on the couch was like, yeah, the world's going to shit. They said that to me, and I was like, yeah, no kidding. And then I was just like, that's an invitation to say something, though. And so I was like, I was like, yeah, but I just don't, like, Jon Stewart's acting like he just thinks, like there's no problem at all with the way Democrats have been talking about Putin and Russia. Like, to me, it's been like itching to go to war. Like, they've been saying all the things for World War III. Like, they've been really wanting it for 4 years. And so it's actually, for me, like a breath of fresh air to see somebody punk Zelenskyy. But that's terrible, because I know people are like waving the Ukraine flags, and they have the Ukraine socks. Like my father-in-law wears like socks that are the color of the Ukraine flag. And so shout out to Dave. I'm sorry if this comes across as like callous or out of touch, but I'm genuinely confused about how Democrats or the American left became so seemingly pro-war, saying Putin had no reason to, like, it was, Biden said it was completely unprovoked. The reasons we already went over address the fact that it's clearly not unprovoked. It's a totally reasonable disagreement that these nation states are having. And so, and then I don't know where my parents stand. I don't know where their media is at messaging about all of this stuff, but CNN is saying Trump's more unpopular than he's ever been or something like that, and that this is like a historic low. And then I changed the channel, and they're saying Trump's doing fantastic. The American public is super happy about it, and he's doing way better than Biden did at this time 4 years ago. So for my dads, what do you kind of imagine they're going to bring to the table, assuming we can kind of have a conversation about this in the next few weeks?
Yeah, I hesitate to make specific claims about what your dads think, because they are individuals who, I'm sure, think about the things that they are watching and reading. In terms of what the kind of mainstream narratives are, the Democrats, of course, have maintained that Putin is an irrational actor, or that he's motivated by ethno-nationalism or some kind of imperialism, and therefore isn't somebody you can negotiate with. And then they do the kind of Munich thing where they say any attempt to negotiate with him is something he will just take advantage of in the course of expanding his state. conversely, you'll hear from the Republicans this idea that the war can't be won as a reason for it to end. I think part of what is difficult to understand is that the intention is not for the war to be won. The purpose of the war is to create instability so that the Europeans have to take on a larger role. The purpose of the war is to make the Europeans spend more money on defense and to get them to buy more weapons so that the American arms production capacity can be increased. And while there has been some U.S. funds that have gone to Ukraine, those funds then immediately go back into the arms production sector of the United States because the arms dealer for the war is the Americans. And so when the Europeans spend more on defense, the arms dealer for the war is the Americans. Now, some people will get this mixed up and they'll think that it's the American arms dealers or the weapons sector that is driving the conflict. That's not the case. The administration wants there to be more conventional arms production. Both administrations, Biden and Trump, want more conventional arms production in the United States for the purposes of supporting the pivot to Asia. Both of them want our arms production capability to be increased so that a war with China can be fought over a much longer duration of time than would otherwise be possible. Not necessarily for the purposes of fighting that war, but for the purposes of credibly deterring anything that they think that China might be interested in doing in the Pacific with respect to, say, Taiwan or those islands in the South China Sea or some of the contested territory with Japan, right? This really is not about, except in certain wild fever dreams, defeating Russia and destroying the Putin regime. Of course, if that were to happen, there might be some interest among certain parts of the West in what that might be useful to do. If it was possible to break Russia up into statelets and gradually integrate them into the West over a long period of time, that might be something people in the West would be interested in. But the war is not to be evaluated on the basis of whether it accomplishes that objective. The core function of the war is to make the Europeans spend more money on defense so that the United States can pivot more attention away. Now, people who are critical of the war go, how can this facilitate the pivot to Asia when it causes the United States to be more militarily committed in Ukraine? Wouldn't the United States be better off allying with the Russians for the purposes of doing the pivot? And that would be the John Mearsheimer view. And that's one of the views that's out there with respect to criticizing what's going on. And so for many on the MAGA wing, the idea would be to cut some kind of deal with Russia so that there could be cooperation established, and then that might be able to break up an alignment of Russia with China. But part of the reason that these people are thinking this way is that they think Russia is a sufficiently powerful state that its alliance with China is consequential. And it's not clear that that is the case. From the point of view of, say, the more Bidenite wing, Russia is not a sufficiently powerful state to actually perform this function. But there might nonetheless be a need to get the Europeans to pay more in defense so that the United States can be less involved in Europe. Not because Russia is so enormously powerful, but simply to facilitate that movement. And because the Europeans could not be persuaded by all sorts of different alternative means to increase defense spending over a period of many years, this becomes the vehicle for getting them to do it that's most likely to actually have purchase and to succeed. And this is something that has gone on in both administrations. But in terms of what is the media narrative for the center-left media is that Putin is an irrationally aggressive, imperial, ethnic, racist fascist, and that's what's driving it, his mentality. And that's very similar to the kinds of narratives we saw during the Bush administration about Saddam Hussein or about the Ayatollah in Iran, claims about the rationality of these actors, that are meant to invalidate any negotiation from the beginning. And conversely, in the Republican imaginary, there is this, argument that Putin is leading this very powerful state that we have to cut some kind of deal with because they're powerful, and it's irrational to try to fight them because they're so strong, and we couldn't possibly win or get any of what we want from fighting them. It's not obviously the case that that's true either. If that were the case, why would it even have begun? Why would the Biden administration think to attempt it? What is it that they thought could be achieved? They clearly were not thinking principally in terms of destroying the Putin regime, because they were prepared to evacuate Zelenskyy at the start of it if it went very badly very quickly. I think the narrative of Ukraine has been kind of led down a primrose path. It's been suggested to Ukraine that certain outcomes are possible for it that are not actually ultimately going to be possible. Some of that is true. But then there is a question about what will ultimately happen, because there's a lot of room between Poland and Belarus. There's a lot of different possibilities in between. And there is some real possibility of negotiating something that would put an end to the violence and stop the killing of enormous numbers of young Russian and Ukrainian men. Enormous numbers of them. And I think that's the thing that gets lost in this discussion. There's an enormous number, many, 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 many thousands, tens of thousands of Russians and Ukrainians being killed continuously to accomplish these objectives of these varying kinds. So when I talk about these are the things people are trying to achieve, or these are the things they think are possible, in all of these cases, these people are content to achieve these objectives off of all of these Ukrainians and Russians who are pressed into military service for one side or the other, and then compelled to die in ditches running through gunfire, getting blown up by shells and killed by 4 million drones that are active in the conflict, which is another thing nobody talks about. There are 4 million high-tech drones buzzing around out there, fighting wars in all kinds of newfangled ways. And the young men who get drafted and thrown into this situation are getting killed in ways they don't even understand, by things they don't even comprehend, that they haven't even been told about, that they're not privy to. It's really, incredible, the stuff that's going on. But that's not what's most important to the media people on either side. What's most important to the media people on either side is disputes about how best to contain China, whether Russia should be a part of the containment zone, or whether Russia isn't necessary. And if Russia isn't necessary for the containment zone, then it's possible to use Russia as a kind of sparring partner to build up the military capability of the alliance system. And I think that's really the Biden strategy. And Trump is interested in pursuing a different approach, but it's a different approach for ultimately the same end, which is to construct a viable containment ring around China.
China is the point.
Yes, the pivot to Asia. Obama's pivot to Asia is the thing everybody is still doing. And that's a pivot that has been in the public conversation since the late 90s. It's been continuously the thing that is operating in the background for everybody.
Ooh. Now you follow the week. And I know we only have a half hour or so remaining. And I want to get to some of these updates about the tour and Sarutu and the studio and the painting behind me. But before we get into all that, I've been thinking about China a little bit. I want to read a book about the U.S. and China, but specifically their proxy wars in Africa that have been being waged over the last 20 years in secret. And of course, since it's been a secret, and since the U.S. bases across Africa were a secret, up until 5 years ago, according to somebody, I don't know. That's why I would need to read a book about it. I need someone who's thought a lot about this, to pound the situation into my head. Not an article won't do. I need a good book. And so I'm putting that out to everybody. I normally don't just like when people send me every little article that they find interesting on the internet, but I am super interested in the proxy wars that have been fought between the US and China over the last 20 years, especially because I've been going deeper into the whole Congolese slave trade and child soldier situation, which is so foundational for our global mode of production. But it's also foundational for the Chinese role in that mode of production. So both sides have a vested interest in keeping the child soldiers, or at least the people who run them, on the side of these corporations that serve, I would say capital, but like that removes the fact that it's really about, making people's PlayStations and making it so that your phone's battery life lasts a little bit longer, because those lithium ion batteries require a lot of cobalt. And so, that's what I think about. Whenever I think about like everything on the news, I'm always just like, well, they're not talking about that stuff, and that stuff is all necessary. And so people want to argue about pronouns and sex ed and books and guns and whatever kinds of culture war things people want to fight over. People want to talk about Democrats and Republicans, which side is the lesser evil. But all it takes is the little tiny bit of zooming out to be like, it's not just moving around seats on the Titanic as it is sinking. It's child slavery. It's child soldiers. It's keeping Africa dark. And by keeping it dark, I mean keeping it out of the light of representation in media, right? Like keeping it out of the discussion, keeping it out of the books, the articles, and of course the news. And so it's been keeping me awake at night. Of course, I think ever since Kony 2012, way back in the day, it became a thing that I started thinking about. But it's only grown as a concern, while at the same time it seems like a lot of people just were like, oh yeah, it's a problem, it sucks, Kony sucks, everything sucks, nothing we could do about it, let's move on. And of course, Kony 2012 didn't talk at all about the proxy wars being fought between the United States and China there, because it wasn't even a known fact yet. Kony was just like this lone wolf, bad actor kind of guy, not someone funded by either of these global superpowers. Okay, so I don't know. I kind of want to give you the last word on whatever you think about all that, and if you have any book recommendations for me, or if I don't even know how much you've dug into all of that. So I'm just curious. I'd like to come back and do a whole episode with you on Kony 2012 as a sort of archetypical example of why a certain kind of activism doesn't work. But as far as like China and the U.S. in Africa, like, yeah, anything you got on that?
Yeah, it would be interesting to do a Kony 2012 episode. I remember that well. That was a significant event, I think, for a lot of us in our thinking about how this stuff works. In terms of Africa, it's a little difficult because there are so many different places in Africa where different things are going on. There are some African states that have a greater level of state capacity and functionality. There are other places where you have political vacuums, power vacuums that open up, and therefore a need for somebody to establish order, and then competition among different players who want to be the establishers of order in those places. So when you talk about a case like the Congo, the issue in the Congo is typically a lack of state capacity and a lack of order, which allows for different factions to be picked as potential winners. And what makes these proxy wars kick off is that you end up with a power vacuum or a civil conflict that gets started. And then once it gets started, there's a question of who is going to make the peace happen. And different countries want different players to be the ones who make the peace. So because of this, ostensibly out of a desire to provide for order so that economic activity can take place, they start backing different sides in an attempt to get their preferred version of peace and order.
Right.
But the consequence of that is then more conflict, and it continues and spirals. I think that one of the things that the African states will be looking for is to try to use any emerging great power competition between the United States and China to get the kind of deals that states in the third world used to potentially get from the Soviet Union and the United States in terms of economic development and investment. When you have a choice about which state you can buddy up with, this allows you to play the two states off each other for economic advantage. But your capacity to do this depends on you having a functional state, which can credibly commit to fulfilling its end of the bargain. And the problem that often comes up in Africa, not everywhere, but in many places, is that African states don't always have the capacity to hold up their end of the bargain. They sometimes can't pay back money that they borrow, and they sometimes aren't able to actually provide the security guarantees that they lay out. And it's because of this lack of state capacity that African states have struggled to really benefit in the past from there being two different states with big purses willing to potentially give them money. It's because of this lack of credibility that this problem has tended to come up. Now, China, in its initial foray into Africa, has tended to be very loose with money to try to buy friends in Africa. But what China is gradually figuring out is something that has been understood for a long time in the West, which is that if you just throw money around in Africa, you won't get a lot of it back in many cases. And it's for that reason that there has been a tendency for these states to get involved in a more military way to try to establish the order which would actually allow for the economic activity to take place. But what does this mean in practice? It often means long, drawn-out proxy wars and conflicts in which many people die, and these conflicts often perpetuate the poverty that they're attempting to solve. I think one of the things that is often forgotten about war is that its purpose is to make a peace. The reason people fight wars is to construct a peace. So when wars go on and on and on for a very long time, it's in part because it's been so hard to make a peace. And so the reasons that it's hard to make a peace tend to drop out of the equation, and the foreign states are positioned as causal of the conflict because they supply arms or because they supply weapons. But the reason the war is occurring is because there isn't adequate order to provide for economic activity in the region in a sustainable and stable way such that people can make contracts and expect that the contracts will be followed.
Isn't that...
And then also, when one of these regimes goes, it tends to have spillover effects. For instance, when Libya goes, then as a consequence of that, you get a bunch of mercenaries and fighters drawn into Libya for that conflict. And then when that dies down, they spill out. They go look for work other places. So there's also a whack-a-mole effect, which is if you do bring peace to one specific area in Africa, the fighters who were drawn there for money, for an opportunity to make a living, will go somewhere else and look for opportunities to get involved in other places. It's very difficult when you have a kind of roving mercenary army or a number of different roving mercenary armies to quiet it down because they're always looking for somebody that will pay them.
But isn't the economic instability of the interior of a country like the Congo a condition of its profitability to the outside superpowers? Like, don't both sides have an economic interest in the opposite of peace, in keeping the place destabilized so that cobalt can be extracted by what are called artisan miners, which is people with no real tech, no real regulation. It's just people in mud at that point. And that's not allowed. Like, children in mud pits is not allowed. None of these countries would say that they support it, but by keeping the region destabilized and assassinating the kinds of leaders who step forward to try to unify things and then negotiate with the two countries. You want to negotiate with us, but you won't play ball the way we want you to? Well, then bye. doesn't that kind of instability like keep it open for pure extraction?
You have a point. There is a disadvantage for both of the players if the states get too strong in Africa to the point where they really are able to play the two states off each other. But if there's complete and total instability, then there tends to be very inefficient mining, very inefficient resource extraction, because you'll tend to get raids and hits on the various miners. So Nigeria is a classic example of this. In Nigeria, if the state were to become too strong, the state might nationalize the oil and make it much harder for the foreign oil companies to operate, right? But if you break the state to such a degree that it's full of roving mercenary bands and militias, then you won't be able to get the oil in security. There won't be enough security to get the oil, and then that will itself undermine the economic activity going on in Nigeria. So Nigeria has been a case that for a while has been acceptable to many sides, because in Nigeria, the state is too tribalized and too internally divided to nationalize the oil and control it. But it has enough state capacity to maintain order. That was true until relatively recently. And in more recent years, there have been security problems stemming, I think, ultimately from the Arab Spring and what happened in Libya, a kind of movement of fighters south from Libya into Mali, into Nigeria, and an excitement of, through the Al-Qaeda terrorist network, Boko Haram, some of these Islamist groups that operate in certain parts of Nigeria. They have managed to, at this point, destabilize the oil extraction to a point where it's difficult to operate in Nigeria, and some of the oil companies have decided not to continue to invest in it because of these security risks. So the goal is not to produce a bunch of Congos. Congo is too difficult to operate in. What they want is something marginally more stable than Nigeria, but not so integral to the point at which something like Gaddafi can happen, where you get a dictator who establishes a centralized unitary control over the country and then uses that to commandeer the oil and use it for other purposes apart from those that they would like to see.
Right.
That's really, there's the Gaddafi problem, and then there's the Congo problem, and then there's trying to get something in between, which is typically what they're looking to do.
Okay. To the person in the chat who is saying that I'm giving people too much credit and that Africa has always been war-torn by ethnic struggles, tribal struggle. Duh. But also, which people did I give that much credit to? I didn't give credit to any people. I said that there are superpowers, interests that have an economic interest in capitalizing on that historic unrest. When you have it's like saying two brothers are fighting, and it's like, cool, okay, two brothers, they've always fought. Oh, okay. Well, does it change anything when there's giant corporations funding the two brothers? Like, all of a sudden those two brothers are sponsored? Like, at that point, it's a kind of a different situation. You take a conflict and then you pour gasoline on it for some reason. Well, there are objective and obvious reasons, is all I'm saying, buddy.
There is a tendency, I think, to, if not on racial grounds, then on cultural grounds, essentialize about Africa and use this as an excuse for not thinking very much about the conflicts that happen there and why they happen and whether there's something that could be done about them. I think that's been a problem there for a very long time, that kind of tendency to just make sweeping claims about Africa as a way of not really having to wrestle or grapple with it. But I understand many people have lots of problems in their day-to-day lives that won't be solved by addressing what's going on in Africa. And so for them, it doesn't seem like a useful or effective way to spend time. Many people who are working in rich Western states, or even in states like Russia or China, don't have a tremendous stake in whether peace is achieved in various different African countries. And so it's understandable that people would excuse their disinterest in that in various ways.
Yeah. And it does make it a lot easier to just be like, well, they've always been this way. It's just the way it is. But I don't know. Like, I'm hoping that when I find the really brilliant book about the situation, it's not going to just say what that commenter said. I'm looking for something a little bit bigger brained. But if you find something,
Yeah, there are some things that have been published. The thing is that it's constantly ongoing, and a lot of the stuff that goes on is difficult to get good information about as it's happening because the news reports are limited, and then it takes a while for academic research to come out and for good UP well-sourced books to come out. So what you tend to get is a lot of people making claims that you can't necessarily be sure are right based on information that may not always be good. And this facilitated to some degree the environment in which the Coney 2012 thing could happen, where you have a public that is really struggling to get good information. You have people who are trying to help, but they're struggling to get good information. And so you have these information gulfs when it comes to Africa that even people who are trying to help, even people who are really interested in trying to improve the situation, suffer greatly from, to the point at which oftentimes their interventions prove counterproductive. And this is part of the sense in which, in trying to establish order in Africa, you often make problems worse. And it does need to be emphasized that very, very often people who try to establish order in Africa mean well. They really do mean to establish order. And they really hope that what they do will create a situation in which things will improve for people in Africa. And that's often part of the narrative that they tell themselves as they engage in the activities that perpetuate the conflicts.
well, people meaning well is all that matters, I suppose. You know,
No, it's certainly not all that matters, but it does make it, harder to straightforwardly resolve it, because it isn't just the case that there's a set of baddies with bad intentions that if we could get them to stop touching Africa,
right.
that would solve the problem. It's not so easy. And it's hard to tell who's making an intervention that might actually be helpful in a context from who's making an intervention that's counterproductive. It would be, I think, too neat to say anyone who ever sends any weapons to any African state for any reason is just fueling conflict there. That would be too sweeping. And yet many, many times when that happens, that is what occurs.
Yeah, I think that's a very reasonable assessment. For the live chat, I just closed out the poll. Thank you, everybody, for voting. We had over 60 votes. I don't know where the results went. I just closed the poll out. But basically, I asked, if forced to choose between Democrats and Republicans on Ukraine, what side are you going to go for? 53% of you said Democrats. I'm proud because it's just, I like to see that I've got a mixed audience, that we've cultivated something kind of mixed there. Of course, several people were mad about the framing of the question, the options. A couple of people said, one person said, I'm offended about the options. And then somebody else responded and said, you wake up offended. Fair enough. I think, I'm sorry, only 38 votes. I got my polls mixed up. We did a different poll earlier. This was a 50-50 between Republicans and Democrats. 38 votes, 50%. That's awesome. But all right, let's switch gears here. Yeah. So everybody who listened up until this point, that was the conversation about Russia, about Zelenskyy, about Ukraine, about China. And now we're going to be moving into a quick little update before we close out. I got to get back to life, and so do we all. But for those who are wondering where we're at and what's going on, well, we are in Billings, Montana, a place I did not imagine that we were going to be stopping on tour. Not at first, but we've had a bit of back and forth with Tyler over the last few months. And Tyler Murphy is a local artist here in Billings. He is the grandson of a cowboy poet, Christian man who wrote this book right here. I was taking a look at it earlier. Christ and the Cowboy by Chuck Murphy. Chuck Murphy seems like a really great guy to have as a grandfather. And, as evidence to that, Tyler Murphy seems like a really great guy too. But he's also a great artist. And I'm in his studio right now. We are surrounded by amazing works of art, such as this one. And I'll just, instead of running around with a laptop trying to show you guys lots of them, I'll just kind of let this one be behind me for a moment. Isn't that cool, Benjamin?
Yeah, wow. That's a really, really, it's a little blurry coming through the PC, but even so, I can tell it's a really beautiful painting. Yeah. To be in the house of the guy who painted that, that's something.
Yeah. Oh, and this is his studio. Yeah, it's not at his house, but he has opened his house to us, and we are staying there as well. And then I'm trying to decide if I want to put him on the spot before or after I show the painting. Before or after? After. All right. So yesterday when we got here, it was from an 8-hour drive from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho to here. We're traveling in convoy. We've got 2 vehicles on this tour, and we all kind of take turns being shotgun in different vehicles. Different people take turns driving. And that way it's just a lot of fresh conversation and mixing people up, and no 2 people on the tour click up too much, you know? So it's me and Anne and Nance and Will from the UK making the documentary. And I got here with Nance ahead of Anne and Will, who were in the van. Nance and I, our plan was just to come up here real quick, say hi, go freshen up, and then come back after we were showered and had maybe a little food in our stomachs because we were pretty hungry. So we come up in here, say hi to Tyler, who we've met before because he was in Boise for TUCon, at least for half of it, because he had some stuff he had to deal with. But like the fact that he came all the way down in the midst of a bunch of different things that were going on, it was noted. Well, you know, we come up here, we give him hugs, and you know, he introduced us to a couple friends, and then we were like, okay, we're gonna go change, because I was like wearing sweatpants, and you know, like I shouldn't have been appearing in a studio as far as I felt out of place. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna go freshen up. We'll be back. And he says, don't leave. Take a look around first. And I was thinking like, oh man, I'm too hungry and dirty to be in the mindset or mode of art enjoying. And so I was like, I'm aware you've got great paintings, Tyler. I gotta go clean up. I didn't say that though. So I just decided to humor him, and I stepped back and I kind of like looked around. And then I was like, what? What? Look at that. Can you see that? Let's see if I can go stand closer to it.
For those listening, this is a painting of Zizek with the timenergy symbol behind him. It's quite a painting.
Yeah, it's crazy. I can't believe he did this. So this is a gift from Tyler to Theory Underground. It's going to be the first piece of art anyone's ever really made for TU. Painted for TU. We've got graphic design, of course, from people like Luke, but no, this is definitely the first oil painting. It is oil. Yes, it is oil. Okay. This is the first oil painting I've ever seen of Slavoj Žižek, much less something that involves Theory Underground or timenergy. And Tyler, maybe he'll say something about the foreword and why he felt inspired by it. But the fact is the foreword to my book is at this point the most underdiscussed thing on the internet. I don't like to promote myself, and so I haven't talked a lot about this forward, but the fact that Slavoj wrote it is crazy, and what he actually says in it is wild. And so what I really appreciate, beyond just like the art itself and the gift, the symbolic exchange here, is just like, holy shit, man, this is a tribute to Slavoj's forward. And it's the first real symbolic gesture like this towards the studio. We've got several people who've donated thousands of dollars. So we're trying to raise $15,000 for the studio that we're building this year. We were just up at my parents', we're taking over their farm, and we're building a studio there first before we build our house. And it's going to save us a lot of money because we've been spending a lot of money on the studio space. And so, renting a space versus owning a space, do the math. It's going to be a really great thing. So I've got up on the screen, for those who have eyes to see, Theory Underground Studio Fund with a QR code for Zelle. Zelle is the only way to make large transfers without, PayPal levels of gouging, right? They take a huge fee out of stuff like that. So Zelle's great. And just use the QR code if you want to help out. We appreciate it. $50, $100, $200. We've gotten a few like that. We really appreciate those. And those names of those people who made those donations are going to go up on plaques on the studio. But there'll be some bigger plaques from some people who made these huge contributions. But if you can't give us thousands of dollars or even $50, art's cool. I like art. And this is unlike something, I've never ever had anyone do anything like this for us. This is just absolutely mind-blowing. And so I'd like to introduce you all to the artist.
Yeah, Dave,
here.
has anyone ever given you an oil painting ever?
He said, has anyone ever given you an oil painting? No one's ever given me an oil painting for anything. So, yeah. Now, I'm going to give the headphones here.
Any kind of oil painting, let alone this one.
Any kind of oil painting, much less one that size. I've got friends who used to do art with my friends, and I guess I did have a couple of friends' paintings up, but not oil, and not this size, and definitely not like a lot of thought went into it. And so I won't be able to hear Benjamin when I hand the headphones off here to Tyler, but I want Tyler to just kind of say whatever he wants, and you two can have a back and forth if you please. Here you go.
Well, I don't know that I'll have too much to say, but one of the things that I would say about this, like the forward in Time Energy, and I need to reread it because it's been maybe a month or two since I've read it, but I do remember thinking okay, so Slavoj is saying yeah, but Byung-Chul Han, he's great, but he's missing something in this, and David McCarricker is hitting on something that Byung-Chul Han isn't touching on. So I guess that's all I would have to say about this, about the Time Energy thing. I don't know.
A quick question about it. What inspired you to make that painting? And at what point did you decide you were going to give it to Dave?
So I have a really good friend named Ken Yaris, who's a great painter, and he and I work together a lot. We talk to each other all the time while we're painting. And he's like, so what are you going to do to surprise these guys when they're coming? And I'm like, oh man, I don't know. He's like, dude, you should do a big painting of Slavoj. And I was like, you're right. So I have to give credit to my buddy Ken for that. And yeah, as I was working on it, it's like, well, I don't know. I either this needs to go to Mikey or it needs to go to Dave and Ann. So, yeah, I don't know.
How long did it take to paint it?
I just painted it this week, in the last couple days. And it was kind of for a little while, it lost the likeness, of Slavoj. So I felt really good about it for one day. And then I was thinking this will just be a quick, whatever, it doesn't have to be that great of a painting. And then all of a sudden it quit looking like him. And then I was like, oh shit, now I have to really buckle down and make this thing.
So he gave it a lazy eye and it fixed everything.
My brother was in here and he was like, this isn't, something in the eye isn't quite right. And I'm like, yeah, it needs to drift over a little bit. So anyways.
I guess I kind of want to ask you a quick question about why a cowboy artist is interested in Zizek and what you're doing with that, and in Billings of all places, and what how do you explain that to people? Because you were telling us a little bit yesterday about about, you kind of have to explain to people that you're into this stuff, but that's kind of an interesting thing to do in Billings.
Yeah, well, you were bringing up my grandpa, who was this cowboy poet, and yeah, he really was an incredible granddad. And I lived with them, with my grandparents for like 3 years when I first started my art gallery. And they would always have people just like popping in and saying hi, old friends. They'd have do a pop-in. We don't have pop-ins anymore. We got to bring back the pop-ins. We don't have the time energy for that. But my grandpa, he kind of had dementia. He could hardly hear. But one of the things that he could always give to people was a poem, because he always had poems memorized. So you'd walk in and he'd start rattling off. I was just a young cowpuncher, hardly dry behind the ears. I think that in a week or two I'd mouthed out 14 years. But I wasn't a total greenhorn, because I recollect as how I could saddle a horse and harness a team and get milk from a cow. And it goes on and on. It's a great poem. He had that like till the day he died, even though he couldn't recognize people. But so storytelling has always been something that I've been interested in. And years ago, a friend introduced me to Peter Rollins' work, and I was just blown away by this guy who could tell stories and tell jokes and weave in philosophy. And at the end of it, I'm going, I don't know what the hell he just said. I don't know what that was about, but it fascinated me in some way. And so then that's how I got into Zizek, and all that was through Rollins.
Rollins.
Yeah. Yep. So,
Cool.
I don't know.
Sorry. The thing no one could see is that you signed it not with your real name, but with a persona, and it's a persona that is a shout out and a joke here at Theory Underground. For those who are in the know, it's Kyler Murray, right? He put Kyler Murray as his sign off. Todd still feels bad about this, but like as I got in the email, did you see the email? I sent you the screenshot of it today, right? Zizek also already has responded to the existence of this painting. But we can say what Zizek said in response to the existence of this painting. But first, let's explain the name.
So yeah, I guess last summer I was driving up to a paint out, and I was like live streaming and commenting in on some questions and on a TU stream. And I asked some question, and then Dave asked it to Todd, but Todd thought that Dave's like, hey, so Tyler Murphy asked you blah, blah, blah. And Todd goes, wait a minute, Kyler Murray of the Arizona Cardinals? He's a TU guy? That's amazing. And you go, no, Tyler Murphy. Oh, well, shoot, like you should have just gone with Kyler Murray. That would have been much cooler. Like if he was a part of this thing, because who cares about Tyler Murphy? And it was such a startling kind of experience as I'm driving down the road to like, oh, wow, they're asking, Dave is asking my question to Todd McGowan, like my favorite philosopher. And then all of a sudden, who cares about Tyler Murphy? But I love that. I mean, especially, and, I was going to hang out with all my artist friends, and we have all got, probably too big of egos and stuff. So to share that with them and have, anytime you can have the kind of get knocked down a peg, that's a good thing. So, so I love, if I'm around Theory Underground, you can just call me Kyler.
Yeah. Cool, man. All right. Well, thank you. Yeah, that's just killer. What a cool thing. Seriously.
Oh yeah, you do have to show it, Zizek.
Oh yeah, he's gonna read the Zizek email here, and then all the other notes that I had about the studio, the painting, the tour, the Sarutu. I mean, really, the only thing I haven't really addressed here is Sarutu. I'll tell you all about how that research is going, and why it's no longer research. We are no longer doing research on the road, but we are doing something we call D-search, and We'll explain the regulatory reasons why that is true later. But for now, we'll wrap it up with this. Of course, like I'll put the headphones back on and Benjamin and I will close out, and he gets to have the floor on the way out. But before we do, to close out this whole thing on the painting, I sent a picture of it to Slavoj this morning, and I told him a little story about Tyler and said, look what he made, and it's a picture of it. It's not the Soy Jack version of the picture that you'll see on the Substack. It's the other picture where I'm sitting in front of it, and Slavoj's response goes as such.
I love the painting because, in my view, it indicates my dark side. Its title should be, "Would you allow this guy to take your daughter to see a movie?"
I almost told him, no, I would not let you take my daughter to see a movie. I don't even have a daughter, but no, Slavoj. I wouldn't let you or any other man I know take my daughter. But then I decided to instead say, no, but for real, it does make you look like you are an advisor to Emperor Palpatine. And then I said,
Well, it's kind of got like an Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Obi-Wan Kenobi?
It's like, God, is it looking too much?
Tyler said that he was kind of thinking it has an Obi-Wan look. Yeah, but as far as like I said, it makes you look kind of like the advisor to Emperor Palpatine. And then I said, which is kind of true because you do write pieces for The Guardian. So we'll see if he laughs at that. All right, so there you go. That's our little thing. Isn't that special?
Yeah, that's really, really something. What an incredible thing to have motivated somebody to bring that into the world.
Seriously. I especially after all of the things I've said about art in the 21st century. There's no such thing as an authentic art. There's no original art movement in the 21st century. No artist can capture the spirit of the post-class fractured mass. I say all kinds of things that are insulting to very, very egotistical artists. So only the really humble, nuanced ones with a sense of humor remain. So, mentally give it up for Tyler. All right. With that said, anything else we want to say on our way out here?
Well, I think that this is just an example, just one small example of the kind of meaningfulness of this type of theory, that it can compel people who do things like make art to make stuff that is in some way in dialogue or in conversation with it. That is very, very different from most kinds of theory or philosophy that have been produced in the last 50, 60 years. There are very, very few philosophers or theorists who have ever gotten anybody to make an oil painting in any way related to anything they've done. And when I say oil painting, I don't just mean oil painting. I mean a work which requires that kind of dedication and commitment and seriousness, which requires really staying with for a significant period of time over multiple days, a subject, something that you tarry with, to the point where the artist is saying, it's been too long since I've read that forward 2 months ago.
Yeah. And Tyler's the only person who has said to me, Zizek said that you got exhaustion better than Byung-Chul Han, that he's missing something. And I was like, dude, I didn't realize anyone else noticed that. But he does say that. And not only does he say that, but he says the reason is because Byung-Chul Han only talks about the kind of exhaustion that everybody feels. He doesn't talk about the kind of exhaustion that blue-collar people are faced with, which is unique. And I was like, damn, good job, Tyler. So kudos for picking that up.
Yeah, that book and your theory in general deserve more attention than they tend to get. You don't just interview people. You write serious stuff that is engaging and significant. So I'm glad we were able to give some attention to that today.
Thank you. Yeah, Feel the Heat in the chat said, how would Amazon not get the proceeds from Time Energy book if it was written on site? Be careful you don't get sued or something. I have been being very careful to not get sued by Amazon, but I'm not going to be too careful because I'm also fine going bankrupt in a hell of a lawsuit if they really want to. But not for this reason. They don't care about that. And they do get proceeds from this because I publish it through Amazon. But no, the kind
Jeff
of...
Bezos is already winning there.
Yeah. Sorry, guys, you can't beat him. It's not going to work. You might as well just work with him. He's a lot faster and he's a lot better. I know other indie presses, they spend a lot of money and time dealing with sending individual packages, and it's just like, no, if you order Time Energy, you'll get it in a week. I mean, really, on average, that's how it works, and I don't have to do a damn thing. I'm sorry, but that's punk. And if you think that it's somehow like bootlicking for Bezos, I'm sorry, the whole universe is bootlicking for Bezos. We have to be realists about capital, not capital realists. And so what does that mean? Well, in part, it means don't swim upstream if you don't have to. You have to strategically resist. And this is not the hill I'm going to die on. So that's why we're on. That's why we're on Audible.
Gone for him. The thing that Bezos has gone for him is that he is such a sleepy, lazy guy who doesn't want to do things, and so he builds everything to be as easy as possible, and that actually adds value as opposed to what a lot of other billionaires do, which is grind and obsess over work and not understand or regard only in a pejorative way the human desire to not do things. Bezos understands we are overburdened with things, and we would like to do fewer things, and we would like to not have to worry so much about the things we try to do. And he leans into that, and that's why he's been as successful as he's been. And I'm only inspired to defend him at all because of all of the horrible, silly boycott Washington Post stuff that's been thrown around. People who have been saying that Zuckerberg needs to regulate speech on the internet and Musk needs to regulate speech on the internet are now upset when the owner of a newspaper regulates the editorial page on the newspaper that he owns. They've been emphasizing that free speech is only about government control and that the private sector actors have an obligation to police speech. But then when a guy who owns a newspaper wants to have an editorial line that they don't agree with, now all of a sudden that's traitorous behavior. But I have news for people. If they thought that the Washington Post was some bastion of liberal or socialist or left-wing editorial writing, that has never been the case. Washington Post has always been a very, very centrist establishment paper.
Yeah, there are worse things. But yeah, I mean, them not paying taxes and stuff. Look, we just got to steal Amazon. They're just the best in the game. Now we have to steal Amazon. And the question is, who's we and how? Does it have to be the left? Why left? That's what you're listening to, everybody. Great to have you all here. We're going to get back to our lives. Take care. And thank you.
Bye-bye.
We can direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Theory Underground exists to cultivate the conditions necessary for a working-class intellectual renaissance that goes beyond old political categories or other identitarian niches. At TU, autodidact workers with earbuds and professionals who see no future in existing institutions or movements are able to challenge their doxa and develop an understanding of the situation we are in.
If you subscribe at theoryunderground.com, you'll get access to a package of courses, including my Intro to Fault Line Theory, which includes Intro to Nick Land and Intro to Slavoj Žižek. These courses are being woven with the 3 courses that take place on a month-to-month basis, spread out throughout the year of 2025. Those courses are 12 Core Concepts and the Fundamental Problems with the Situation Today with social theorist David McCarricker, 12 Essential Political Thinkers with political theorist Benjamin Studebaker, and The Philosophy of Nature with philosopher Nina Power.
The way these all get woven together at a deeper and more meta level is through the ongoing research seminars led by David McCarricker, Benjamin Studebaker, and Michael Downs, where they engage with one another's work by sharing developments from their own perspectives, theory, and research.
If you subscribe at higher levels and support our work, we'll support your development with bespoke teaching. Alone and unaided, we struggle to grasp our situation in its fullness and formulate a meaningful response. By working together and pooling our energies, we can do better. Join us at theoryunderground.com/subscribe.
There'll be two kinds of people in 10 years. Those who said, I knew all along Theory Underground was going to make this huge difference. Those are the people that are like Nance, who were on the sidelines at one point and then said, nah, I'm going to get in. I'm going to roll up my sleeves and I'm going to go hard. And then there's another kind of person, a person who waits in the wings, collects receipts, and who will say in 10 years, oh yeah, I was there. I saw that happen. And then they'll gossip monger. Listen, if you want to get involved, get involved. But if you're going to sit there in the bleachers, well, here's some popcorn. I hope you have fun.